I've just learned over and over again that usually the first step to any process is, this feels impossible. And that just means you're at step one. You know, it doesn't mean that it is impossible. It's the people that push through and move past that feeling that will discover that it's definitely possible.
Hey everybody, it's Scott Savlov and another The Path Here podcast. And with me today is Lindsay Stirling. And the best way to describe her music, because it's very diverse. It is classical music, pop music, EDM music, and now Christmas music, which is something we'll cover a little bit later in our interview, is her latest album, Snow Waltz, which drops today and all through the holidays. And Lindsay, you have a tour starting, which is exciting. You know, you're prepping for a tour and getting going post-COVID and all these things. It's got to be exciting for you to just kind of get after it and get inspired to let people hear your music and feel your vibe and energy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I've been, writing this music since the very beginning of the year. And, that's the funny thing about a Christmas album is you basically experience Christmas all year long. At least I do, because it's like you write it in the spring and then you finalize it in the early summer. And then you're making music videos and prepping for those through the late summer. And then the fall, you're in rehearsals for tour, and then Christmas, so it's like you live Christmas, you live this music so long. But that makes it all much more exciting because I've been, prepping for this album release and this tour. I've been rehearsing already and prepping the costumes. And then today I finally got to announce that it's all happening. And so it's like Christmas morning for me.
Well, that's exciting. And let's talk a little bit about an electric violinist especially lends itself to classical music and for Christmas music, because a lot of Christmas music is based on classical music. For you, as a young woman, a young lady, you started playing violin at 5, correct?
Yes, 5, 6 actually, but same.
And back then, they probably had you playing just classical music. I mean, because my memory of learning any kind of music, they always make you learn classical music. You always want to try something that's more contemporary, but they start you off learning classical music. Is that your first inception for violin?
Yeah. I was classically trained up till I was 17. And partially because there just wasn't anything else to play for the violin. Nowadays you can find a lot of different music for whether you play the flute or the violin or whatever. There's Taylor Swift versions of the songs for violin, or there's, Lindsay Stirling for violinist, or other artists that have taken it in other places. But when I was young, there wasn't anything like that. And so classical is just what you did. But I will say I was drawn to the violin because I fell in love with classical music. My parents loved it. They played it in our home all the time. And so as a child, I begged for lessons because of listening to classical music. So even though I wanted something more fun to play, I still liked it.
The violin has kind of, I wouldn't say a stigma attached to it, but it does lend itself to where people think of violins. I mean, I was just recently in Italy and saw Stradivarius, right? And you you take a look and it's like, well, how much is that worth? Well, it's priceless. And you go, a violin is, people play the guitar and they kind of chill, and there's different types of guitar. It's very rare to think of when you're first learning how to play the violin that you're not going to, be in an orchestra, and it's got this kind of feeling to it of, real music, a substance to it.
We like to think that it's the classiest of the instruments, we violinists.
Yeah, exactly. So you sit there and, and to me, it's always kind of a fun to listen to how people got inspired into their craft. You grew up in Arizona, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I went to college, went to Arizona State, so I know a little bit about
The heat.
Gilbert, right? You're a Gilbert girl.
I am.
Tell me what's your memory of your upbringing in Arizona. What comes to mind?
Well, I was recently somewhere, we were on a long drive and we passed through this little town and smelt the dairy farms like really strongly. And everybody was like, oh gosh, it smells terrible. And I looked around and I said, this smells like my childhood. This reminds me of being a kid is what this smell reminds me of. I grew up in Gilbert when it was a lot more rural than it is now. And so a lot of my childhood memories do have the violin in it. It was very much like a piece of my identity I was Lindsay and I played the violin. It was my thing. But also I was Lindsay who loved to run around and play in ditches, and we would play in irrigation water and get dirty and muddy. I remember like we had the animal club. We got the neighborhood kids involved. I was very like entrepreneurial for a young age and like made a business called the Ready to Work Girls, where we would like do whatever chores people wanted for us when I was like 10. So I've just always been a little like kind of get your hands dirty, entrepreneur spirit, little individual. Country bumpkin that also happened to play the classiest, as I said, of the instruments.
And what kind of, describe your home, your family upbringing. What comes to mind?
Music comes to mind. We all played instruments. My parents loved, like my dad had this old record player and he would always be playing, his favorite classical records on it and the Beatles. So that's a big memory. Also, just very like a mindset that if you can think it up, you can make it. Like my mom was very crafty and she taught me how to sew at a really young age because I remember I wanted to be a kangaroo for Halloween and she didn't have time to make it for me. And so like she normally would make my costumes. And so at the age of 8, I asked her, well, teach me to sew and I'll do it. And I sewed like a full body kangaroo costume at the age of 8, just because my parents kind of instilled in all of us that there was this idea that if you believed you could do it, you could. And if you can just get the right pattern, you can figure it out in life. And I'm very grateful for that spirit that was instilled into my like childhood, because it's really what has made it possible for me to do all the things that I do.
For you, did you, you're a member of LDS. Did you go on your mission prior to college, or did you go to some college,
Yeah, it was right in the middle of college.
Window.
Yeah. I was in college for 2 years and then I went on a mission and then came back and finished.
Okay. So you went to BYU.
I did.
And if my research is correct, you're a recreation management major. Right?
I am. I was going to be a recreational therapist.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. If you didn't have music, what were you going to do?
I actually, during college even, I worked at a residential, that's the word, a residential treatment center for troubled teenage girls. And so girls from the age of 12 to 18 lived here, and we would help them go through rehab therapy, overcoming things like eating disorders, drug addictions, and you name it, trauma. And it was a really intense job, but also it was one of those jobs where some days you feel so fulfilled and some days you feel so beaten up. But also that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with teenagers and help them through trauma.
Were you doing any creative music, like writing music at that time?
I was actually, when I was kind of in that phase of just starting to delve into like my own music. And it was like my senior year of college when I really started to get into that. And, so I was kind of like doing this walk where I was walking 2 roads that were starting to diverge even more and more and more. And it was all at that time that I was like, wow, I'm either going to be a therapist or I'm going to be a dancing violinist.
Well, there's not that many dancing violinists. Let's just identify that are successful dancers and successful violinists simultaneously. So right. Give me a little bit about your background in dance, because obviously, as we talk a little bit about Dancing with the Stars, but at the same time, you were a pretty good dancer. The decision for you to immerse yourself into dance, did that take away time from the violin or take away time from playing with your friends?
Well, so when I was really little, like I begged for violin lessons and dance lessons because
Right.
I loved both. And my parents said, they couldn't afford one, let alone both. And so they basically took me to a class of each and said, you got to choose. And I chose violin. And I never danced until I was in college. Not that I didn't want to. I tried out for the high school teams, because I wanted to do it, but I could never make it because I didn't know how to dance.
Right.
And so in college, though, I started writing this music that was like kind of EDM fusion, and I was practicing it and thinking how the goal for me was always I wanted to put on a show. I wanted to entertain people. It wasn't just the music. I was like, I'm writing the music so I can someday go on stage. And so that was always the vision, and I just couldn't imagine playing this music that I was writing, like the style of it, and just standing there. It just didn't feel right. And so I came up with the conclusion, well, I'm going to be a dancing violinist then. And the funny thing is I didn't know how to dance. And so in college, actually, is when I just started to teach myself. I couldn't even call it dancing. It was more just like choreographed movement that
Right.
I felt was quirky. And it included things like winking at the audience and like, cocking my head to the side and like just moving my shoulders, which was so unnatural for me as a violinist. Just these very simple movements. Everything had to be on the downbeat, because I just couldn't fathom doing anything more than that. And I've just continuously pushed myself, and it went from being able to walk on rhythm to now I can do full back bends and high kicks, and now it's even turned into aerial routines where I swing on a trapeze while playing the violin and I balance on it, and I just continuously am always like, what's the next thing? Like, how much further can I push this envelope? And it's been so fun.
How hard is that, for you training? I mean, when you started off dancing and you're incorporating, like you just said, it's probably not as rigorous as it is today. I mean, today, I would think that you have to train your diet has to be very specific, right? You have to, rest. It's much more of being an athlete than just being a violinist. I mean, it's hard enough to be a great violinist. It's right. It's hard enough to be a great dancer, but to incorporate all of that and make your music where you are giving the audience that feel for who you are and what you are, it probably requires a lot more energy and attention. Where did that come from? You know what I mean? Because you're not just like a typical violinist where if I said to you, give me, your passions of music as a kid, as you really grew into yourself as in college, how did you like immerse yourself into, being so good at both? Well,
it's funny, when I first started to try to dance and play at the same time, it felt so impossible. Like literally impossible. As soon as I would take a step, it's like the bow would stop. It's like, it's like this double part of your brain. And I had to work so hard. Like I'm talking weeks of rigorous practice to learn one like 90-second routine. And, but just like anything, the more I've done it, I still really have to work hard to learn these routines. And I have to do it in a very similar fashion as to when I first learned. Like I have to learn one, then learn the other, then slowly combine them. But now it happens so much faster. But it's interesting that I've just learned over and over again that usually the first step to any process is this feels impossible. And that just means you're at step one. It doesn't mean that it is impossible. It's the people that push through and move past that feeling that will discover that it's definitely possible. Because I remember the first time I held a violin and how impossible it felt. And I think it's so important to continuously be a student and try new things, because it kind of reminds you that you're moldable in every shape, every sense of the word, whether it's a skill you're learning or whether it's your mind and you just want to be happier and you just want to maybe learn to be more patient, or, wow, I didn't realize that I'm kind of a snappy person. Like, we are moldable and we can change things even if they feel impossible at first. And I will say also, another thing you asked about was just the attention and time it takes to do this. And anyone who has a craft, you only have so much attention and time to give a craft. And the amount of time that any great violinist puts into their art I put it in as well to my overall art. And so I had to accept a long time ago that I was never going to be an extremely respected violinist in the classical world. Like there are violinists that can play the socks off me, and they would never consider me a great violinist because you only have so much time and attention to give, and I've had to divide my time and attention between several different arts. It's like I will also never be the best dancer. No one's ever going to look at me and be like, wow, she's one of the great dancers of our time. No, because again, I've only got so much to give, and I've had to divide it. I'm also a costume designer. I'm also a video editor. I'm also like a social media expert at this point. Like, I have had to compartmentalize my attention into so many different things. So am I the best at any of them? Absolutely not. But am I the best at what I do, which is the concoction of all of them? I think I am, but also because there's no one else that really does that. So it's easy to be the best when you're the only one.
As a parent, I tell my daughters all the time, if you don't believe in you, then other people may not believe in you.
Absolutely.
So you have to actually believe in your abilities, put your energy in a direction so that way everything you do has some success. So when you were, say, in college and your first writing, what music were you listening to? Who were your go-to artists?
At that time, I had just fallen in love with Skrillex. I loved like dubstep and thought he was so groundbreaking. So Skrillex was very influential into the music I wrote. I've also always been an Evanescence fan. I just love the drama in their music, and you can kind of hear that influence in there a little bit. But yeah, I was very into electronic, like Nero, Skrillex. I'm trying to think. Shiny Toy Guns. I loved them at the time.
So that kind of spun you into the ability to write music. You take your efforts to America's Got Talent. Now, that's chronicled, but how did you get yourself to America's Got Talent? I mean, how did you say to yourself, okay, this is going to be something I want to do?
Well, they actually have talent scouts that like comb the internet for interesting things, and I was an interesting thing, and they found one of my videos that I had posted. Like, I posted one YouTube video and I didn't really understand what YouTube was, and so I never revisited it. But that video did pretty well, and it was found by one of their scouts, and so someone sent my YouTube and my Gmail, a little email, and I remember really like thinking about it and praying about it, being like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to buy a ticket to LA. And it was like a scary thought. I didn't have a lot of money, so to like take time off school to go audition and pay the money for the flights and the hotel and everything. But I prayed about it, and I remember feeling really good about it, and that's why I was like, okay, we're gonna take this jump.
For you, the success, and I say that meaning you gain national notoriety being on America's Got Talent. But you use that as the impetus for your drive to push your needle, to push your success model. With that, you embraced YouTube, I wouldn't say early on, but it kind of like from a stardom perspective, you really knew how to elevate yourself using YouTube. How did that come to you?
Well, shortly after I was on America's Got Talent, someone else reached out to me, and I'll always be so grateful to Devin Graham. He introduced himself as, hey, I'm Devin Graham, I'm a YouTuber. And this was quite early days of YouTube, so I remember I just was like, what the heck is a YouTuber? It wasn't even really like a common term yet. And he was like, I saw your America's Got Talent video, and he's like, I think what you do is really interesting, and I would love to make a video of you. He was a videographer, cinematographer, and so he's like, I'd love to make a video for you and put it on my YouTube channel. And he's like, you can put it on yours as well. And then he also mentioned, by the way, I'm going to be teaching a class at BYU, a free class, just one night, for how to become a YouTuber. You should come. And I had other plans that night, and so I didn't think I was going to go, but they canceled. Thank heavens, because as I sat in this like little seminar for 2 hours, it's like I had at that time been trying different things. I'd been doing open mic nights. I'd sent my little pieces of music to record labels. I had performed in college showcases, and nothing was taking. And I remember just being really discouraged. And I read this book that was called How to Make It in the Music Industry, and everything in there, I just realized I couldn't do. I didn't have the kind of money. I didn't have the connections. I was like, I was feeling really discouraged, and then I sat in this class, and I knew with everything inside of me, that gut feeling was like, this is it. This is it, and you better start running right now. And so I remember I left that class, we filmed a video together, put it on my channel, and from then on, I was so tunnel vision focused of building this channel. And I just happened to catch the perfect wave. It was right as YouTube started to take off, and I was putting content out so often because I was focused on it that I was able to ride this wave perfectly. Like, everything is timing and serendipity and, divine intervention. And I happened to find the right spot, and I was so lucky.
For you, your music itself has tremendous appeal here in the States, in the US, but because of the instrument that you play, it has a strong appeal in Asia and in Europe. Was that daunting on you, that you knew you would have to travel? It's like a jazz musician. Jazz musicians know they've got certain cities in the United States that are good markets, and then other cities that people would think are good for jazz may not be really great for jazz. They don't really book it out. They don't pay well, but they go to Europe and they go to Asia and they make bank. For you, does that come into play with your music? Do you know that specific things that you're doing, say EDM music and classical music, appeal to, so when you're planning out your tours, do you do it around, where it's that success model is?
I feel like when I first started touring, it was just like I was ready to go anywhere. I was excited. Right. And I remember being actually very surprised the first time I went to Europe, because I don't know, I hadn't quite grasped the fact that the internet meant you no longer had a nucleus necessarily. It's not like the old days where you would tour in your city and then tour in your state, and that, you'd grow this way. It was so interesting to at first be kind of frustrated, because I was like, oh, I've started this YouTube channel. I've got about 5 people in every city across the world that know who I am. But that was a little bit discouraging, because you're like, yeah, I can't tour where 5 people know who I am in each city. But then it turned into the best thing ever, because it just kind of webbed out. And suddenly those 5 people turned into rooms full of people, and I was like, wow, now suddenly I went from being able to tour nowhere to being able to tour almost anywhere. And I just remember my mind was blown, my first time in any of these countries, like Germany, France, and all over the place in Europe, and just rooms full of people that showed up to see this violinist play. In my mind, it was a really crazy feeling.
Your collaboration, you've done a lot of collaborations, and several of them are noted artists, that, like you mentioned, Evanescence before, and Amy with Amy Lee. What does her sound register in your brain? Because when you're listening to something, you're already your collaboration is, where your tonality is with your sound of your violin in your head. What does someone like that, their voice, mean to you?
Oh man, I love Amy Lee. I love her voice because it captures emotion. She just has a way of capturing so much feeling.
Right.
And I like that there's also a lot of contrast in her music. There's these intense, gritty sounds, but then her voice soars, and I always like to try to create music that has contrast in it and different types of moods that are almost conflicting. And I think that Amy Lee really inspired me to write like that.
For you as well, you went on Dancing with the Stars, right? And
I did.
That again chronicled a friend of mine, Alfonso, loves. First of all, he was a professional dancer as a child, right? And
Yeah.
then he goes on Dancing with the Stars. So whenever I bring up Dancing with the Stars with him, it's, it's a long story goes with it.
Yeah.
For you, I mean, you had a great instructor with you, Mark Ballas.
I did.
And now you've collaborated with him outside of Dancing with the Stars, correct?
Yes, I've done multiple things with him, and he even is on this latest Christmas album.
So for you, tell me about your experience with Dancing with the Stars and how you reflect on that for your current music. Give me that experience and that performance, because again, people look at it and they, whether you love the show or you don't love the show, but from someone who is in a craft like you, go on a show like that, you incorporate dance into your routines. What came out of that experience that has enhanced your current presentation?
Well, I mean, for one, I got trained for 3 months by one of the best coaches, like dance coaches in the world. So it definitely upped my level of dancing skill, because it was the first time I'd actually ever received formal dance instruction. Like, I've worked with choreographers a lot. I've learned choreography, but to be like taught and worked with, I actually had never done that before. And so it definitely upped my skill level, but also I think that what makes that show so engaging for so many people, I don't think people even realize why they are feeling such an experience from it, but it's because you take individuals who are really good in their lane and they're very competent and very successful, and you take everything away that is like their superpower that they're so used to being, coasting on. For me, the violin and, music. They take all that away. They throw you in heels and they teach you ballroom, which is such a different art for anybody on that show. And then you have to be so vulnerable in front of millions of people when you're used to being super competent and successful, and you're suddenly like Bambi, on that ice is how you feel. And so it's such a humbling experience, and it makes you it made me revisit the beginning days of my career when I was like figuring things out, not sure if it was going to work, having to trust a lot, and just, so it's such a humbling experience. It kind of reminded me how important it was, again, to be a student. And I think I've kept that mantra with me as it's helped me try new things, such as aerials, such as, always trying to do new things in my shows and my tours, being okay trying new styles of music, because it reminded me of it's okay to be a student. It's okay to feel like Bambi on ice. And actually, that's sometimes when you're going to discover some of your greatest new attributes, because we're constantly changing. And if every time we change, we feel ourselves slip and then we run away, you could miss something great.
The incorporation, you've mentioned aerials. Is that something you use for training, like for working out? Or is that something brand new to you that you just said, someone came to you and said, what we need to do? Because you're doing a whole Christmas album, you're doing this new tour, let's just put you in the air and do this. I mean, how did you come full throttle into aerials incorporated into your new material?
I've always loved Cirque du Soleil so much. I think it's fascinating. And so I actually, in COVID, decided, hey, I'm stuck at home. I can't tour. And so I actually started to dabble in aerial work. And I hired a coach. I actually started with hair hanging, which is the worst idea ever, but I started hair hanging with a hair hanging instructor, and it is what you think. You put your hair in a top knot and you do aerial acrobatics, and I played the violin as I swung around by my hair. And I realized that was not for me, but I did, check it off my bucket list. It's something I'd always wanted to do. Got a cool video out of it. And, but I was left feeling very inspired of well, that was crazy hard, but there's so many other things. So I've started to learn hoop, and I've started to learn trapeze, and, it kind of started as more of a hobby, but like all my hobbies, I can't help but pull them into my craft. And so now we do it on tour. 2 of my dancers have learned it with me, and we actually did it a little bit on my last Christmas tour, but it was just we were babies in it. And this Christmas tour, we vamped it up. I'm so excited to do these routines that are actually quite, I don't know, I think they're quite cool. I do it while singing, and I also do it while playing the violin, hanging upside down and spinning around. And again, it's definitely something no one's ever seen. So I'm really excited to bring this on the road this year.
If you, before we really delve into Snow Waltz and the tour, you've collaborated with a lot of people. Is there anybody that jumps at you that, I'll give you an example. Dave Matthews performs with a violin, right? I mean, that's a big artist incorporates violin into his writings. Is there an artist that maybe no one's thought that you listen to that you would like to collaborate with?
I mean, some people know because I've said it before, but John Williams, he's like 90 and still writing music, and still, like, he just conducted at the Hollywood Bowl, like his annual concert.
Right.
I love John Williams. He's like my favorite musical storyteller. And he's part Jedi.
He can live to like 180. So don't worry.
100%. He's also magical, like Harry Potter. So, he's got magic running through his veins and the Force and all those things. And he would be my top.
Interesting. The upcoming tour, Snow Waltz, you seem like a person that absolutely, I mean, you light up when you talk about Christmas. So the time period when from Halloween ends, is that like your go time? Is that when you are at your happiest? Like fall is turning into winter, and because some people don't really like the holidays, and then other people, that's their happiest time of the year. Would that describe you? The happiest time of year for you is the holidays?
I would say it probably is. I mean, there's so much fun, the anticipation leading up to the holidays. And, I was just reading a book about happiness, and looking forward to something brings just as much happiness as the actual event, if not more. Like, talked about the importance of planning vacations ahead of time so that you can anticipate and look forward to it. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about Christmas, and that's why I like to start right after Halloween, is because the anticipation of prepping for that day, Christmas Day, usually is way more fun than even Christmas Day. And also it's a time, my family has all spread out all over the States, but yet we get to be together every year at Christmas. It's a time of family. It's a time when everybody's turned a little bit more to giving. Everybody has understands that there's a certain amount of kindness that should be given around the holidays. And so I just feel like it brings out the best in people. It brings out, all the best practices for what does create happiness in individuals, even scientifically. So I do. I love the holidays.
Your new album, you collaborated with producer Gladius?
Yes.
What was the connection there? Or what brings out the best in both of you together?
I feel like, I've worked with Gladius on, several projects before, but this was the first time that we worked on a bigger project together. And it's wonderful working with just good people, and he and I both have a lot of the same sensibilities of everything from kindness to spirituality. We could talk about spirituality and about, you have to have a level of trust with the producers you work with so deeply. And especially, some of the songs on the album, because it's a Christmas album, they really tie into my faith. And so it was cool that I could literally describe to him very faith promoting and very special topics that I knew he would understand. I knew he could relate to when I say, I want to write this song about the progression of the life of Jesus Christ. And, I'd like to capture that in music, and I could explain the different feelings, and I just knew he would understand it, So, even though we don't share even the same religious beliefs, we share a similar understanding of just connection to spirituality and a love of art.
For you, the album, even, another collaboration, David Archuleta. Were these selected by you, management? How do you get these folks to work with you? And I say this in a real positive way. It seems like that niche, this grouping of people have a like a spirit that seems to be very consistent. Where it's not like you're going, you know, Marilyn Manson and Lindsay Stirling, I'm not seeing this, right? And you go, well, that makes sense because their musics don't, there's no vibe there, right?
Yeah.
With you, David Archuleta, the sound that David Archuleta puts out with your music sounds pretty synergistic.
Yeah.
Is this your selection? How do you do that?
When I wrote the song, it's called Magic, that David sings on, I immediately turned to the producer and I said, I want David Archuleta to sing this. I knew. And luckily I know David, so I was able to like text him. You know, it's always great when you know the people and you can just reach out, because sometimes it can be a lot of hoops to jump through to even find the contact for the manager of the artist, you know. So it was nice that I could just text David and he's, you know, before he even heard the song, he said, absolutely, you know. But yeah, the different song selections, it's always a different process. Sometimes you write a great song and you don't necessarily know who you want to sing it. And so you have to kind of search a little bit. And I was really fortunate with this album though, because, Crazy for Christmas, I wrote that with Bonnie McKee, and she's one of the best writers in our industry, and she also has an amazing voice and has her own artist project. I've worked with Bonnie before and love her, so it was fun when she's like, who do you want to sing this? And I was like, I want you to sing it. Like, you know, I love her, and I thought her voice was just so perfect for it. She you know, so it all kind of came together. Same with Christmas Time with You. Frawley wrote that song. So it was great to just be like, she has an amazing voice. Let's have her sing it. So often songwriters have to almost divorce themselves from the songs they write, you know, for better and for worse. Sometimes they want to, and sometimes they have to like kind of give up a little baby that they they wrote to someone else. And so it was fun to get to, you know, tell them like, I think you're perfect. Let's have you sing it.
So let me get so people can understand this. So you have your album, you're done. Then you start planning out the tour. Are you working with a choreographer to do it your way, the way you want it to be? So are you collaborating with because you're doing multiple facets, right? I mean, you're not just, normally you'd say an artist is out there, they have a choreographer to keep movement going. So that way it's not stale, right? There's movement. For you, it's completely different because your movements are incorporated into the actual music itself.
Yeah.
And which is visual. So does that require a lot of your energy as well for, say, this album and this new tour? How much time did you have to put into that element of it?
Well, I put a lot of energy into the tour. Partially because sometimes I feel like budget is always an issue. And so sometimes like I'm like, you know what? Our costume budget, don't worry about it. I'm going to do it myself. So I literally have a living room. It looks like Craftopia in there because there are pieces of fabric, lace, sparkles, bedazzles. Like literally I'm like putting together the costumes myself. Partially because I love it. It takes me a little bit back to that little girl that made that kangaroo costume.
Kangaroo.
Yeah. Right. And it allows me to kind of, it's almost like at the end of a long day, if I've had writing sessions or something, I'll put on a movie and I'll sew, you know, like it's kind of relaxing to me, or I'll bedazzle something.
What's your go-to movie?
Well, my go-to movie, I should start watching holiday movies. But let's see.
Not necessarily. I'm just saying, you know, like I watch It's a Wonderful Life every year. I know the dialogue.
I do. That's one of my favorites.
My dad had passed when I was too young when he passed.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
That movie. Yeah. But it reminds me of my father. So for me, it's holiday. And then I'm able to, talking about holidays, go to that place where I'm watching that movie. A lot of times I'm not even thinking about the movie. I'm actually thinking about my dad.
Yeah.
And right. Because that's the best part about whether it's music or movies or food. The smell of it, like you're talking about, fertilizer may represent Gilbert to you when you were a kid, but these things kind of trigger you, right? Like triggering mechanisms for
Absolutely.
you. You're sewing, you're trying to get your mind clear. You put something on. Is there a go-to movie that makes you happy?
Let's see. Well, when I'm multitasking, I definitely like that. I definitely watch things I've already watched before. And
Right.
so I've probably watched Bridgerton like 3 times because I'm like just sewing and making things. I've been watching Making the Cut. It's a reality show about crafting. So as I'm crafting, I'm watching other people like make things. Anyways, that's kind of fun. But
No,
yeah,
because you're in that space, right?
Yeah.
You're like feeling like you're commiserating with that.
right. It's like I'm with my people. I'm crafting. Or also RuPaul's Drag Race is another favorite of mine. And again, they're making their costumes and they're getting ready for their show, and I'm getting ready for my show. So I love those kind of things. But then, like you were saying, I do creative direct all my tours as well, just because I feel like I understand the music so well, and I love storytelling. And so to me, the tour is a chance to storytell. And so by the time it comes to choreography, that's kind of the last step, is like I can go to the choreographer, tell her exactly what songs I want the dancers in, and tell her the concepts. I'm like, this one I want it to feel very circusy. This one, the concept is, we're going to be dressed like skeletons and we're going to be like a little bit afraid. Like this one, so I can tell this choreographer the stories, and I am not a professional dancer. So then she takes these ideas and she makes them come to life through these really fun, vignettes and dancing.
Well, I love it. Your tour starts in November. You're going to be, to say you're all over the place is not an understatement. It's a big tour. Physically, you ready for it?
I am. Yes, I've been working out. I've been practicing my aerial work. And I feel like we're going to be really ready for it by the time it comes. My whole team is so excited. We've all just been buzzing with ideas and getting ready. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
Well, I thank you for visiting with me a little bit today and sharing a little background on you. I think that when I listen to your music and I listen to this new album, it kind of transcended to me the ability of someone who takes passion in her music, whether it's Christmas album or not. It seemed very meticulously picked, and the songs, the different renditions that I've heard over my life, I can remember and try to compare what you did to another song, which is kind of cool. That's kind of, I think, the essence of music, right? It's a subjective love of sound. But what you did is amazing. And I think that is very upbeat and inspiring to others. And your story in itself is very inspiring because you just, you didn't take no and you didn't take limitations. You kind of, boom, you popped on your own and you made your own path, your own journey, which is for me why I pursued you and your team to have you on my show, because I love that. I love people who could take the no and turn it into a yes. Oh,
thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you coming on the path here, and hopefully look forward to seeing you on your tour.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and for having me and for all your really insightful thoughts and questions. It was a great conversation. So thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to write us on thepathhere.com to have one of your questions featured on a future episode. You can follow me on Instagram @ScottSavlo. If you want to send us a tweet or follow us on Instagram, it's @thepathhere podcast. Hey, I'm Scott Savlov, and you've been listening to The Path Here.